Welcome to the Role of Data and Planning in Homelessness Prevention session. I'm Ahmed Bonakdar. I'm the Managing Director of Research at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. I'm very glad to be here, and I'll be moderating the session. So let's wait for a few seconds. Okay, so I'd like to reflect and acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, as is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that the city of Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'd like to thank the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness for organizing this session. I'm very positive that we will have a very fruitful and engaging presentations by our presenters. So we will have 3 20-minute presentations, and we have arranged to take questions at the very end, so please hold on to your questions and write them down for at the end of the last presentation, and we will take those. I'll start with Dr. John Graham from School of Social Work, UBC Okanagan. John Graham, PhD, RSW, is a professor of social work and former director of the School of Social Work at the UBC Okanagan campus. He was Murray Fraser Professor at the University of Calgary, where he served for 17 years. And is former director of the School of Social Work at Florida Atlantic University. He heads the Kelowna Homelessness Research Collaborative and is one of several scholars who advise on homelessness to the Premier's office in the province of Alberta. He co-led the 2009 National Conference in Calgary, which the present conference succeeds. He has published on homelessness and related areas for many years, and he holds a number of Tri-Council grants in this area. Please join me in welcoming John Graham.
All right, how's this thing working? There we go. Well, great to see all of you. It's nothing to put my foot against. I'm a former practitioner, like many of you in the room, and so I come at this question always sort of thinking back to, the work I did in direct human services in homelessness and in other areas and the implications there too. Homelessness plans are a fascinating thing, and I was involved with Alina Turner and it was a real privilege in Calgary before I left in 2014. And there was a whole lot of really interesting work that went on with plans, multi-year plans, and then seeing how that would then morph into some very fine work with the province and then nationally and so on. And the whole question of plans always kind of intrigued me because I was always aware of the power that they hold. I mean, they can really sort of get communities together to coalesce around certain agendas. They have a very important knowledge mobilization framework, as we're seeing in Kelowna, and just bringing attention to the issue of homelessness. And yet, we always kind of want to understand what the rollout is like in the sector itself and what are some of the implications. And there's just so many things that we just don't know in life. And I took a look at the secondary literature and started to convince myself that there was a research question here that was intriguing. So I had a buddy in Lethbridge who I'd worked with for many years, and I had some friends in Quebec who I'd worked with. And so we decided to do this comparative study where we took a look at the experiences of multi-year plans in 3 cities that were of comparable demographic size. So in the range of 80,000, 120,000 or thereabouts. Geospatially, they're very similar because they're in proximate, sort of equal distance to the American border. Economically and politically, they're very different places, of course, and very different things. And relative to multi-year plans, they were also in a very different place because Lethbridge had experience with several. Kelowna was just rolling out the first, which was written by Alina Turner and is an extremely fine plan. And then Sherbrooke has its own experiences too. So it was an interesting question, a comparison. And there were two kind of further factors that sort of motivated my interest to do this thing. Firstly, I've always been in a mind that there's siloing in the human and health services generally and in homelessness specifically. And everybody is so darn busy doing things. We're all just so blessedly busy. And how is it that we can kind of marshal up various innovations that are going on in other places and begin to figure out how we might draw from them and then sort of scale them up and apply them in our own place? So how is it we get those sort of dialogical relationships going and sustaining over time? So that was sort of part and parcel of the logic that led to this little grant. It's a multi-year thing with the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and it involves Yale Boulanger at Lethbridge University and Catherine Maurer and Mary Ellen Donnan at McGill University and Bishop's University, respectively, along with a whole team of really talented people and community partners. Most importantly, the community partners. So what do we mean by small to medium range cities? Well, when you apply for a grant, you got to get all those things figured out. So the StatsCan came up with an approximate categorization of 30,000 to 100,000. The OECD has its own thinking, which is a little bit bigger than that. And we tend to, I thought I'd share the OECD thing because it's interesting, as we'll get to in the Q&A quite potentially. But we're more or less going after what StatsCan is declaring as that. But the kind of the important implication here is there's enormous implications in terms of rural homelessness, because as many of us know, there's such a migration of rural to urban in these smaller urban cities. So the siloing point is extremely important, and the need for knowledge transfer is extremely important, and the whole question of kind of coalescing and learning with multi-sectors on how we might improve homelessness service delivery and how we might really get the very best out of these multi-year plans and how they're rolling over a particular period of time. There are various the fancy academic word here is, if you want to impress friends, is heuristic. Ooh, it makes us all seem so bright when we use these words. And that's just a simple word for how it is that we think about things. And there are various cognitive biases that we want to avoid in anything, including especially multi-year plans. One of them is the anchoring bias. And that is the first piece of information that we have has an extremely strong bearing on how it is that things roll. And the whole idea of doing this comparative thing helps us to shield a little bit away from an anchoring bias. And the anchoring biases can be a very strong phenomenon in future assumptions and present assumptions. The availability bias is another one. We tend to incline towards mental constructs that rely on immediate and sometimes very recent information. And again, when we take a look at things comparatively and we take a look at things over time, there's the capacity to sort of overrun some problems that would have otherwise existed in availability biases because we're hearing things from other people with other perspectives. Framing effect, how choices are constructed or viewed, is very much influenced by a whole lot of things, including the worry about an availability bias or an anchoring bias. And then there's the inattentional bias, and that is to say that there's stuff, if we actually saw it, it would be pretty friggin' obvious. And it's out there, but we don't see it exactly because there's all these other biases that are sort of inhibiting our thinking. So does all that make sense? Yeah, so various kind of biases that we want to kind of get over and deal with as best as we can. And the pitch here, the argument here is, it's not like the magic solution, but it is one of a composite of solutions of just the whole notion of comparing and contrasting different communities' experiences helps us to address some of these biases that we all naturally might incline to in any situation. So I've described the three cities, and I've described how they've got diverse points in time experiences in multi-year plans, which is extremely helpful in terms of dealing with some of these potential biases. And the idea being that we have really good conversations on a one-to-one basis with human service leaders, middle managers, and direct providers. Now, there's a whole lot of other people that we would want to talk to, and those fall beyond the boundaries of the current study. So for purposes of this particular study, we've limited our data collection to people working directly in the human services sector. And we're extremely interested in using all this data in order to come up with recommendations for best practices, for shifting fragmented actions or results into more coordinated, collective, durable impacts over time, helping communities to evaluate how it is that homelessness plans are rolling within their particular organizations, within their particular communities, and most importantly, building on social science, human services, and health sciences theory and organizational change in order to marshal up the very best that each one of these communities could be, and then using that as a further impetus for scaling up beyond the immediate communities at play. So there's all sorts of purposefully so divergent levels of knowledge based on where people are working within a particular organization, who they're working with, because we've sought different organizations working with different communities. We've made an extremely purposeful, collaborative relationships at the outset with Indigenous communities in each community. We've paid extreme attention to issues of positionality, race, and other forms of sexual orientation, sexual identity, and other forms of identity in getting as fulsome a sort of sense of different people's perspectives along the lines of different areas of positionality background. And we're very interested in understanding levels of knowledge in terms of the multi-year plans, how they could be improved, how they're impacting organizations, and how people are feeling about systems and governments and all of those other sorts of things generally in relation to the multi-year plans. Now, we're in the middle of analyzing our data, and we're comparing the three cities. And so what I have here to share with you today is a point-in-time analysis of one of our communities. We haven't had a chance to compare and contrast all three communities, nor to complete the analysis in all three communities. So further work beyond today's paper. But one of the things that we're noticing as an emerging theme is a major sense of discrepancy in the knowledge of plans and further lack of insight among some in how it is that collaboration is occurring among various service systems in terms of realizing the plan. And this is a theme that we've noticed across all three sites, I should emphasize. And we've done consultation with service providers in the development stage, and we're noticing that frontline workers in particular were feeling left out at certain key areas of knowledge and consultation, and we're unaware of how things were rolling on a month-by-month or even year-by-year basis. Knowledge of the actual substance of the initial plans and how they were operationalizing over time, again, was variable, partly in terms of where people were working within particular organizations, what level of organization, and partly in terms of different organizations had higher or lower awareness. So that's terribly interesting in and of itself. So all of these things, you see, provide fruitful sorts of possibilities for knowledge mobilization and knowledge sharing. The impact on the plan of operations, again, in certain communities, there's no sort of governing body that mandates these things, and there's variance in terms of how it is that funding structures might be anchored to the recommendations of plans. And so there's variance here that's terribly interesting to understand. And so when you're taking a look at organizational change, one of the big things, and there's a fair bit of scholarship on this one, is to follow the money. And the mandates, as we all know as administrators, the mandates of the funders themselves can be terribly important. So this is one of the things that we're terribly mindful of, and we're assessing with great care how it is that there's a relationship or a discordant relationship between the funders themselves and the intentions of a given plan. And then the overall question about systems, homelessness systems writ large, and governments, and how it is that people in the homelessness sector, working in this sector, are understanding efficacy in the plans themselves and how they're being rolled out, particularly with the rollout, is extremely interesting and, again, divergent positions, quite divergent. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't go too long, because there's a trap door underneath here anyway. So if we go beyond 20 minutes, we disappear. And God forbid I don't want that to happen. Want to thank the team in Kelowna in particular. We got this research team together a couple of years ago. If you have a chance to visit our website, please do, the Kelowna Homelessness Research Collaborative. And we're an interdisciplinary team of scholars and students and practitioners and other people. We have a neuroscientist who's doing very interesting work in traumatic brain injury and various protocols in human service organizations in the homelessness sector. We have various social scientists, geographers, economists, anthropologists working alongside social work scholars such as me. We have the public health officer and other sorts of physicians, and several engineers who are doing really interesting work too. So this is kind of the nature of scholarship these years, and it's exciting. It's highly interdisciplinary, as is the work from this little study that I've just described. It's also very multidisciplinary. So please do take a look at the website, and if it intrigues you, by all means, sign up to our newsletter and do stay in touch with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Just wanted to remind everyone that these sessions are being recorded, just in case you wanted to catch up later. Also wanted to say hello to our live audiences. If you also have questions, please write down your questions in Q&A on the application app on your cell phone or whatever platform that you're using. So I could read those questions to our presenters. I'm going to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Jeffrey Messier, with the University of Calgary, Department of Electrical and Software Engineering. Dr. Messier has been a professor in electrical and software engineering at the University of Calgary since 2004. Since 2016, Dr. Messier has been actively involved with emergency shelter and housing agencies as a volunteer project manager and data scientist. This volunteer work has included shelter client record linkage, PPE coordination during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the establishment of a facility in shelter where clients can receive home care services. His academic research explores how data science and machine learning can be used to support frontline emergency shelter and housing programs now. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeff Messier.
All right. Thank you, Ahmad. So to sum up my presentation, the answer is no, or at least maybe not in the way you're thinking, but also maybe yes, but in a small way and maybe in a way that you're not thinking. So I'm grateful to be living today in Treaty 7 land. And this is the land that belongs to the Siksika people, the Piikani, the Kainai Nations, the Tsuut'ina Nation, as well as the Stoney Nakoda people and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I grew up in Saskatchewan. I grew up in Treaty 4 lands. Went to school with the kids from the Nikanit First Nation and in the Cypress Hills area, and it's really beautiful there. So I know everyone flies over Saskatchewan, but sometime have a stopover, and it's really nice there. Yeah, it seems like everybody in Calgary is from there, but yeah. I'm really lucky to work with a lot of really inspiring agencies in Calgary and some generous funders as well. Much of the work I'm going to talk about today, I did with the Calgary Drop-In Center, so I'll be mentioning the DI a fair bit. So I want to make this talk kind of short and practical, but so here are the 4 things I'm going to try to do. I want to start by talking about what exactly AI is and the difference between AI and machine learning. There's a lot of buzzwords with this. Answer the question, should AI and machine learning even be used at all in a shelter and housing context? And if yes, how? What machine learning techniques are most practical for not-for-profits and mostly non-technical staff? If we're going to use this, it can't live on some university supercomputing cluster, right? It's got to work on a spreadsheet. And what does a successful application of machine learning look like in a shelter or housing program? So to start off with a bit of terminology, data analysis, data analytics, this is the use of data to aid in decision making. And this is alive and well in the housing and homelessness space. Almost all the agencies I work with use data all the time to see how they're doing, to help make decisions. But it's typically done at the sort of management program delivery level. There is a difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence. So machine learning is just a computer program that quote unquote learns from past data. And all that means is it's just really good at spotting patterns, right? That's what machine learning does. It looks at old data, spots patterns, and then spots the same patterns in future data. AI, or at least how I define AI, is a little bit different. So AI is a computer program that do tasks that normally require human intelligence and the ability to make judgments or decisions, right? So this is sort of autonomous decision making. Now, this picture shows you know, what the housing world kind of looks like. This is familiar, I'm sure, to everybody in the room. We've got government policy, setting some strategies, hopefully putting some money in place. That flows down to the public and not-for-profit agencies that implement those high-level strategies. And within those agencies and organizations, we have frontline decision makers that really do the work, right? Like these are the people that interact with unhoused people every day and help them. And the question is, okay, we've got data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and how does this fit into this picture? And the question that I'm sometimes asked is, you know, could we use AI to automate some of this frontline decision making? And the answer is absolutely not. This is a terrible idea. And it's not only an unethical idea, it just won't work. So Andrew Ng is a titan in artificial intelligence and machine learning. He has something called his 1-second doctrine of AI, and it goes something like, if a typical person can do a mental task with less than 1 second of thought, we can probably automate it using AI either now or in the near future. And so think about it. People use AI a lot for facial recognition now, right? Like my iPhone can recognize me and unlock the phone. This is all something we do in much less than a second. You know, I can scan the room. I know Kevin and Sandra. I don't know anybody else. And that takes me much less than 1 second. So AI is good at something like that. Even arguably autonomous cars, which are still pretty far away, maybe made up of a bunch of decisions that take less than a second. But I mean, obviously working with an unhoused person to connect them with the right level of supports takes way longer than a second. You have to engage many experts and work over a very long period of time. So a computer simply could not do that. But could we use some ideas from machine learning to at least support frontline decision making, not replace frontline decision makers, but make their job easier or support them? And this kind of leads to something, you know, I use kind of a blood pressure cuff analogy because, you know, caseworkers, and there's a lot of similarities between caseworkers and medical doctors or physicians, family doctors, for example. So my family doctor makes care decisions for me based on my history. Also how I'm doing on the day, maybe a physical exam, asking me where it hurts and stuff like that. And a caseworker will do something similar. It's like, what have you been through? What's your current context right now? But physicians also have other tools that they can use. They can make medical measurements, basically. So they could give me a blood pressure test, ask for lab tests. And these are basically ways for the doctor to assess my risk of a particular outcome, right? My blood pressure is going to say, oh, your blood pressure is a little high. There's a range of cardiovascular problems, heart attack, stroke that maybe I'm at increased risk of. And so we don't really have that when working in the housing space. And so could we use perhaps machine learning to make, quote unquote, a blood or a housing intervention blood pressure test? Or if I want to be a bit more specific, estimate whether or not a client is at risk of a particular outcome. And I think that this is maybe where machine learning could work a little bit better. And so as an example, some early work that I did at the Calgary Drop-In Center was using machine learning to estimate or to identify people that were at risk of becoming long-term shelter users. These people are sometimes called chronic shelter users, although I don't love that label. And so from 2007 to 2020, the Drop-In Center saw an average of 268 new clients per month, so pretty high client volume. When you look at their shelter access patterns of these new people, 85% are what sometimes are referred to as transitional shelter users, and so they're only in shelter for a very short time. They show up, and then in a week or maybe two, they're gone and we don't see them again. 12% are episodic users, so they interact with shelter over a long period of time, but with large gaps in their shelter use. These people are typically vulnerably housed individuals. And 3% of this cohort are long-term chronic shelter users. And we know that these long-term chronic shelter users are high priority for things like housing first strategies. And so how do we know who they are, right? Because they're a small minority. It's only 3% of the people coming through the door. So one thing we could do is just wait a long time. And if you're still around in a year, then yeah, you've been here a long time. But that's obviously a terrible idea, and it's very contrary to housing first. So that's not great. But could we use machine learning to look at patterns in someone's early shelter use that suggest that they are at risk of becoming a long-term shelter user? And this actually, I think, has some promise. And so there is a area of machine learning research called interpretable machine learning. And this is a family of techniques that produce tests that regular people can kind of understand, which is important, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And so the specific technique here is something called rule set searching. And rule set search techniques look at historical client data, and they come up with threshold style tests for identifying a group that is at risk of a particular outcome. In this case, it's long-term shelter use. And so I don't want to dive, in the interest of time, too much into the details, but here's just a sample of what the algorithm produced. So running this algorithm on historic Calgary Drop-In Center data produced the following rule. So in a client's first 60 days in shelter, if they sleep in shelter 54 or more days, and if they interact with support services 11 times or less, they are at increased risk of becoming a long-term shelter user. So this is just an estimate of risk that a human can then sort of take into account in addition to everything else that they're considering. The nice thing about this rule is that I think we can understand it, right? You can say, yeah, if somebody is in shelter a lot and not really asking for help very much, then they're at risk of being here for a long time, right? So there's some intuition here. It's important to make sure that this actually works. And so there's just a couple of performance numbers here. So we get a precision of 71%. That means that if we look at all the people identified by this test as being at risk, 71% of them actually prove to be long-term or chronic shelter users in the historic data. So that means that 29% weren't. The recall is 77%, and that means that 77% of all clients in the historical data that were chronic were actually identified by this test. So we missed 23% of the people. Now you could say, well, I mean, that's not great. You've got 23% of the people that needed help that aren't getting it. I really want to emphasize that this should never, ever be your only way of identifying somebody who should be connected with housing resources. The only way to properly use tests like this is to use it in the context of a shelter that's providing a whole bunch of other programming and supports for clients. This is an add-on, it's not a replacement. And so, for example, at the Calgary Drop-In Center, they have a very active diversion program where they try to make an effort to talk to every single new person that comes into shelter. And so how this test would work best is, you could run it on the data and it might produce a list of 10 names. You would take it to the diversion people and they would say, oh yeah, we know these people, right? I'm working with 9 of these people already. But maybe there's one person on the list that you missed, right? It's like, oh, I don't know this person. And then you can reach out to that person for a conversation. That's how these tools should be used. So to kind of sum up, why is this a good idea? Or why am I kind of excited about this? It's pretty effective if you compare with sort of the fancy deep learning neural nets for this particular problem. These simple rules work just as well. It's understandable, right? Somebody, a non-technical person can look at that kind of threshold rule and say, yeah, okay, someone's here a lot and they're not engaging in supports, they're at risk of becoming chronic. It's practical, right? So this kind of threshold style test you can implement on a spreadsheet, right? You don't need a supercomputing cluster. You can, with a very basic database or a spreadsheet, you can identify people that satisfy this test. Now, I wanted to finish off just with a few practicalities, right? So the question is, if you are running a housing program or a shelter, is all this necessary? And the answer is likely only for very high volume shelters, right? The drop-in center sees a lot of new people. There's lots of people going through the door. If you're in more of a youth shelter context, if you're in a smaller city, Medicine Hat, which is also kind of where I'm from, that's where my parents live, so I'm proud of that. But Medicine Hat is famous for its success on tackling chronic homelessness in particular. And when I sat in a presentation at a previous CAH conference, kind of the secret sauce was they just got to know their people, right? And they were able to do that. And so if you're in a small shelter and you know your people, data's not going to tell you anything you don't know, right? Machine learning it's not some magic thing that's going to tell you anything you don't know. It's a way of spotting people that might be missed due to high volume or high workload. If you decide this is something you're interested in, is your data or IT system ready? This kind of stuff will work with spreadsheets and basic databases, but your data can't be fragmented. It's all got to be in one place. It can't be on a spreadsheet over here and written down over there. It's got to all be gathered in a central location. Do you have some access to data nerds? So, I mean, I'm kind of selling this as being nerd-free, but you actually do need a nerd because, the threshold tests are easy to understand, but the search techniques to find the best threshold test for a particular outcome does require a bit of data science expertise. But this is not a daily, you don't have to interact with us on a daily basis. You can retain a nerd maybe once or twice a year, probably, either through a university collaboration, which is how I work with the DI, or on a limited consulting basis as well, right? I mean, there's lots of people that know how to do this for you. So, and also a final point is, are your staff ready to use the risk estimates? So again, this type of stuff should never ever be used as the only way you make decisions, right? It would be sort of analogous to your family doctor basically not listening to what you're saying, not looking at your medical history, only taking a blood pressure measurement and saying, your blood pressure is fine, so you're fine. Or your blood pressure is high, so I'm going to do this, right? Staff, if you introduce this kind of stuff, I think there's sometimes a temptation to be like, oh, this is machine learning, so we should give it a special place in our decision-making process, and it's really not the case. It's just one more input. And so in the same way that, you know, your staff are already taking so many things into account when they make decisions and recommend people for supports, just make sure that this is not seen as like some sort of shiny special thing. It's just one more input. So, I do think that, you know, in a certain way, machine learning can be used to properly help support, but not replace humans working to end homelessness. I mean, that's really important. You know, there's lots of things you can use machine learning for, but I kind of think that estimating risk of particular, you know, very specifically defined outcomes is a really good way to use machine learning. Machine learning is good at that. There's already techniques that are a great fit for sort of practical IT systems and shelter and housing programs. So yeah, thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So our next presenter, Dr. Alina Turner, and their co-presenters, Travis Turner and Jesse Donaldson. I'm going to introduce Dr. Turner. Alina is the co-founder and co-president of Help Seeker Technologies, a data analytics and insights company for social impact leaders on the front lines of solving the world's most complex social challenges, looking for breakthrough solutions. Alina's expertise is in data-led systems planning, performance, and person-centered design, supporting communities working on complex social issues across the country in partnership with innovative municipalities, all levels of government, Indigenous communities, service providers, philanthropy, and funders. Alina is a fellow at the School of Public Policy, University of Calgary, and serves on the board of directors for the Canadian Safety Knowledge Alliance. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alina Turner.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be back in person, isn't it? I missed this. I missed everybody. So lovely to see so many of you again. And I also see brand new faces. So please say hello to me afterwards. I want to meet everybody. So I was also told not to be too interesting, and I assure you I won't be. But with that, I will get on with my presentation, and I'll do so as well with, I think everybody did a really beautiful job acknowledging the territories that we're finding ourselves on. What I will make a note of is the connection between our work in Canada and some of the struggles across the entire global community when it comes to Indigenous rights. And I come from a country that is on the border of Ukraine as well. So I think that suffering and colonialism are alive and well and play themselves out before our very eyes. And I think that this is the time to brush up on our reading up on the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People everywhere. So thank you. I did see that you did a really good job describing my company, so I won't do that again. But what we do at Help Seeker is data, software, and insights, and we do that specifically for social impact. We're a certified B Corp, as you can see from that little logo. And when I founded Help Seeker with Travis about 4 years ago, as I was doing my consulting work across the country, I saw this rise of these new technologies coming up. And myself, I'm a social scientist, right? You guys, you know me from the last 20 years doing this work. So how did I end up running a technology company when I can't even turn on my computer most days? Well, let me tell you, the truth is it's going to happen with or without us. So let's get in it and let's get educated about it and let's take control over that future, because right now what's happening in Silicon Valley, if you haven't seen the San Francisco stories and the rise in homelessness and how entwined it is with the digitization and this new professional class that is way overpaid. We know because we try to hire them and we can't because we can't afford them. It's like $300,000 a year. Like there's no way. So that trend is not going anywhere. So we need to acknowledge it, and then we got to do something about it. So it's like, well, this is what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to try to work with people that believe that there's a role for data and technology in making social impact for the greater good. There wasn't much in terms of how we might certify ourselves doing this. I found this B Corp certification as somewhere, and you guys know me, I love accreditation. And so, so we're like, okay, let's go through the accreditation process and become a legit B Corp. So that's what that symbol represents there. And it's a new type of, if you will, a social capitalism. It's this blend of, can we do business? Yeah, we need to do business. That's fair. We need to be efficient. We need to put things out. We need to have good products. We need to make sure our customers are happy. Nothing wrong with that. But we also can't gouge and do things purely for profit either. So how do we find this balance? And this concept of balance, we always laugh at it at Help Seeker because it's a core value we never achieve in our personal lives. But we strive for it in all ways, including being a social impact led organization. The piece about data and that I wanted to speak about today is contextualized in a much bigger initiative that Help Seeker is involved in called Compass. And if you've Googled us recently, there was a big announcement, and it sounds like a lot of money, but in the tech world, $5 million is actually not that much money, to do the impossible, which was to create this social transformation platform. What we found when we were doing this work on the ground is our sector is hugely neglected by the technology sector. Why? Because they don't think we're worthy of making money off of this sector because we're so complicated to work with, right? They don't like to develop products for us, and so we usually get shit products, right? We get case management software that is not really for us, and truly, most case management software you guys are on is either built for sales, for marketing, or sales processes, and then it's kind of refed to us as client case management. It's not, right? It was never built for that. So that's why it's really clunky to work with. That's why your frontline people are always kind of pissed off about it, and that's why your CEOs never get the good analytics that they keep asking for insights, and they're not getting it because it was never meant to do that. So we're kind of force-fitting it together. So with Compass, we said we need to do something different. We need to build something different. But what is that something different? So we pitched, and we pitched, interestingly, to the tech ecosystem. We said this is not money that the social sector should be spending. This is a responsibility of Canada to the world to develop something different that we should be exporting this, right? We shouldn't be buying from the US some of these products that we're not even happy with. So we said, let's build a Canadian approach to technology and let's build it with community. This was the end result. It never, and trust me, I'm gonna give you a little bit of tidbit on what's in each bucket, but I'm gonna do that after I do a couple of shout outs to my homies. And where's my thank you slide? There it is. So I've got 3 amazing partners that help co-develop this platform with us. And they're what we call the alpha communities. Alpha in the technology world means it's never been done before and you're gonna fuck it up all over the place. So you better have people that got your back, right? So I got 2 of them in the room. One of them is Susan McGee from Homeward Trust. Where is she? I said she has to come because I'm gonna embarrass her. And then the other one is Jamie Rogers from Medicine Hat. City of Lethbridge, I haven't seen them at the conference. So this platform was built with these communities, which meant that end users, so people with lived experience, develop the workflows and develop the business requirements for it. And the service providers, same thing, develop this with us, not something that was done after the fact. And then, of course, the funders, the folks that are making the systems planning decisions as well. So those are the partners in it. If you're seeing Microsoft and you're like, what the heck is that doing there? We got some credits from them to use their Azure platform, cloud. So we'll take that. And then we've got the digital supercluster and CMHC. So I also want to give a shout out to CMHC and the supercluster because they believed in a really crazy idea. So let me tell you what we've built. And I say we've built because we actually did it. We almost most of us almost died in the process. And I have Travis and Jesse in the back, and Jesse's still coding right now, which she's not even a developer. We all learned quite a lot about the tech world. So I'll start with the heart of this thing. We affectionately call it Vaulto. People laugh at the names. There's meaning behind all these names. Vaulto means bolt, lightning bolt. And it also sounds a bit like data vault, which that is what it is. It's a data vault. In the data vault, we have a knowledge graph, which is a really fancy way of saying it's not when you think about a matrix, like tables, rows and columns in your table, imagine flipping that into a neural network, how your brain thinks. So that's the difference between the old school and the new school. The problem with new school is nobody else is doing it. So we couldn't learn from anyone how to implement this kind of neural network approach to data. Why do we care about that? Because we can connect data from all over the place and make sense of it. So we can turn oranges and apples and prunes into apples through this process. That's the beauty of doing this the hard way. The other piece that's in that vault is what's called an ontology, which is another, you want to sound fancy? Talk about ontologies. But essentially, it's how we have semantic interoperability in data sets. So how can we have one data set that talks about client A and have these characteristics, and then you've got the same client over there with these characteristics, but how do you know this client is the same as that client, and how do you know characteristic A, let's say their self-identified racial identity, is the equivalent to ethnicity, or what is the relationship between those? So that's what the ontology gives us. I explain it like the Rosetta Stone, right, of data, because it allows us to do that. The beauty of that is, again, we can link data sets from everywhere and come up with new insights as a result. So that's the heart of this beast, and it's a beast because, I don't know how many PhDs it took, but it took somebody without a PhD to actually crack it. So don't let that stop you. And in Vaulto, there's also, I'm so glad you brought this up, Jeff, about giving us a refresher on what AI is. But there is, of course, if you're gonna do it, you might as well do it all. So we've got some natural language processing that is also done within Vaulto to actually help us with some of these tasks that when you have so much going on in there, you need some help from the machines. But of course, the machines, we always say, are very, very dumb. So the machines also need to be taught by humans. So we will never stop that kind of co-learning with AI, even until they probably take over and kill us all. But fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. This guy's going to be a good guy. We'll see. His name is Doug, by the way. So that's Vaulto. Now, that's like really as theoretical as I'm going to get, because the next things are going to be really, really practical. So Navigi, that's the platform that some of you guys are familiar with. That's the app where people connect with social services and they know what's happening in their community. If you hate it, don't worry, so do I. It's getting a makeover Q1 next year because, again, it's plugging into this this brain. So it's becoming much smarter in terms of its searches, in terms of its recommendations for services. So that piece has been critical for us. It's always been core to what we do. Carto is the analytics piece. So serving up out of all that data we get, who cares? What does it mean? What are the trends? Who has time? Honestly, you're busy. Let's get technology to help us with that. So how do we bring all this data, layer it on top of each other? Health data, mental health and addictions, opioid deaths. What's the relationship between that and what might be happening with adverse childhood experiences upstream? We can serve that up and answer these deeper questions. The next one is going to be your competitor to your Salesforce and other CRM products out there. So what do you need to know as a service provider to make your business run efficiently? So client management software is the basic there. And our business proposition is, well, we can compete with the private sector because we're for social purpose. So we can undercut everybody and deliver better service. So boom, goodbye. Next. Redo this one is the one I'm most hopeful for in terms of delivering on the promise of coordinated access. The biggest challenge we have with coordinated access, of course, is that everybody still has their own CRM, their HMIS, their ETOs, you name it. Ontario just mandated another product in some of their mental health and addictions services. We will never have one CRM to rule them all. So just deal with it, move on, and figure it out. Figure out something more innovative. The name of the game in the technology is integration, a seamless experience. So demand more from your vendors. If your software is clunky, it's not giving you what you need, keep complaining about it. They need to know. They're the vendor. But the Redo piece is the referral network. It's how we connect and track the data with privacy, with client consent across systems and across organizations, and still bring up those insights to tell us what's going on, where the bottlenecks are in the community. And that is that was like my big dream when I started this. What I didn't know is that it was actually one of 5 different products to actually make this thing work. So that's Compass. The big reveal of the platform is going to be happening in, I won't put Susan on the spot, but it's going to happen in December 7th to our alpha communities first, and then we're going to make a big splash about it and start looking for our beta communities, which is the kind of the next layer of communities implementing it. But the cool part is, if you love your products right now and you only want a piece of it, it's modular, so you don't have to buy into the whole thing. I said a little bit about our core technology and Doug being in the middle there, but essentially what we're able to do is kind of draw the data collection in from websites, from reports, from kind of what's called unstructured text, right? So any like free text, and my team's like 5 minutes. Keep going. get to the other nerdy stuff. Perfect. But the beauty of this pipeline approach is that once you build the pipelines, you can revise the pipelines and process any other data set. So once you have that infrastructure, if somebody comes and says, that's cool, you can do this for homelessness, but can you also do this for, let's say, predicting opioid deaths and which community is going to have the highest deaths? Where do we need to double down on investments? You can rewire the pipelines without having to rebuild the infrastructure. So that's where we spent a lot of time during this last year doing this work. That's the kind of the core of our model, and that's Valto, right? That's core technology. And what makes that core technology work is the ontology again. So I wanted to make it real, like what is an ontology? And I also want to give credit to our partners at U of T, University of Toronto, which we're actually in their territory here too, the Center for Social Services Engineering. Believe it or not, the only people in the world who are more nerdy than I am are these 3 people from University of Toronto that have literally PhDs in social sciences ontology. They've invented this technology. It's open source. It's part of the Creative Commons, which is really cool because that also creates an ecosystem of sharing knowledge and improving on this work. But what this does, as you can see, is you can see the organization, the impact model, the program, the service, these concepts, these buckets allow us to join up the data and to say something about the ecosystem, regardless of whether we're in the homeless serving sector or domestic violence. We can start to connect the dots in our community in a systematic way with data. It's a data model. Okay, and the reason why we want that, of course, is that we can do a better job in planning our social infrastructure. So I'm going to bring it back to the title of this talk, which is about the future of planning, right? And the future of planning is entwined with the future of technology. The future of planning is one where in the past we might have had no data or no information, right? The empty Rubik's Cube, or fragmented resources and resource allocation, which is, I kind of feel like that's kind of where we're at right now, where we kind of know. That's probably the reminder to really get off this stage. So I promise I'm wrapping it up. This is the big wrap up. So this fragmented service approach, which is in a way why we have some of this work around coordinated access popping up everywhere, because we're recognizing this is a pain point. But how do we understand all the colors and then put them all in the right order, right? And we can't do that without having this type of information at our fingertips. The reason why that's important is our social infrastructure planning can become much more precise as a result. So if we can describe housing not just as, the usual way, oh, this is emergency shelter and that's emergency shelter, but if you look under the hood, those are completely different programs, right? They're completely different services and resources. One program that classifies themselves as an emergency shelter might be delivering us, 10 different services within that bucket, and their next door neighbor that's also an emergency program delivers 5 completely separate types. How do you know what you need more of if you don't even know that, right? Like if we can't even compare the right things. So we need to challenge ourselves to get deeper into our planning work and become more precise. So this is kind of the future. This is where we're at right now, where we're digging into using the ontology, and you can see shelter is a type of a program, and creating taxonomies of services. We have over 3,600. So rather than saying, I need more shelter, no. I need more a security-based shelter that provides housing safety, that also has eviction prevention and has a little bit of, what else is on there? You get the idea. You got to be way more precise. And so when you ask clients what they need, same thing. We need to get more precise about our needs from the client perspective too. So saying I need housing, that's not good enough anymore. We need to dig deeper. And then when it comes to planning, we need to become much more specific in the types of service elements and resources that we need. Because there's a big difference between saying I do housing and the number one thing you deliver is information than if you actually deliver a shelter bed or an actual housing unit. Those two things are not housing. They're not the same thing, right? Very different things. So that's why the value is there. There's a couple more here if you wanted to dig into the client side of it, because of course there's a supply demand. Supply is what we do, and demand is what the client needs, and those need to match. So same thing as we think about how we analyze client need from the client's perspective, we need to figure out the match in a much more precise way too. So back to the idea that we may never get to AI solving this for us, but AI can help us. This is the kind of work we need to get AI to actually help us effectively in the right way, in a way that's driven from the client and out. And I forget what I was going to say about this, but that's okay, because I think these slides are going to be shared. So anyways, I think I'm going to leave it at that, but you guys know where I'm at. You got my number, and really it's this future of precision that I want to leave you with. And think about our planning work more aligned to what we're doing in genetics than what we're doing with these blunt instruments. And how do we get there is the question. How do we get there quick? Because if we don't figure it out, trust me, nobody else is working on this the way Canada is. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Elena. Okay, we could start our Q&A session. If you could come out here, I think we're limited by how far these extension cords will go, but if you could come out front if you want to ask questions, and we'll get you the mic.
Or we can just repeat the question into the mic if people want.
Yes.
Yeah.
That should also work. And we do have a question also online, but I'll wait until if anyone wants to get started.
My question is for Dr. Mistake, and I'm just wondering the distinction, the two components, the length of stay, the number of bed nights, plus not seeing a counselor. Did you look at those two variables separately? Like, was that not seeing a counselor, how significant was it, versus just like 54 out of 60 bed nights, this person's on track to be here a while, let's like, you know what I mean? Just curious about that.
Yeah. So just to repeat for the people online. So the question was, like that specific rule that we came up with for looking at people who are at risk of becoming chronic. There was two components to it. One is, have you slept here a lot? And the second one was, did you engage with supports? It turns out that it's the sleeps that are by far the most important. It turns out that this is an easy problem. So if you're sleeping in shelter a lot, you're going to sleep in shelter a lot. Like that's basically yeah. So it helped a little bit, but it didn't help a ton. So if you could only do one thing, just do sleeps. Just count sleeps, basically. If somebody's here a lot in the first 60 days, if you haven't talked to them, talk to them. And forget about filters and databases and anything. And quite often that's kind of a useful output from these interpretable machine learning things. Often you don't need any machine learning at all. You're just like, it's a risk factor and you just sort of look at it. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna read from our live audience. So this is from Afna Naeem. The question is for you, Jeff. Do you have examples of AI machine learning being used in the ways you suggested or presented? Any uses or pilots anywhere in the world yet?
Yeah, so yes, and I'm working with the Calgary Drop-In Center on something that's similar to what I presented today. I don't want to steal their thunder because the DI is doing, some changes with how they triage people. They're doing some really exciting stuff, but that's the closest that I'm aware of doing, enacting something in shelters specifically for looking at people at risk of becoming long-term shelter users. Beyond that, not that I'm aware of, actually. But yes.
Yeah, there's a couple examples out of the U.S. There's a bunch of hackathons that happened over the last couple of years to same ideas that you're mentioning, bringing either data scientists in to take a look at your data and then coming up with some of these models. So I know there was one in New York that was done with the emergency shelters. Again, I'm not sure how successful it was. So that might be worth checking out before a DI implements it fully, just to look at any unintended consequences that might have occurred. That would be good.
Yeah, and I should say also there's been some work in London, Ontario on this, but I don't know. I'm not aware of anything that's proceeded beyond like sort of the academic study space into actual practice. Yeah.
Any questions from the audience?
We have one over here.
Please.
Not to ignore the other 2%, it is another 1%. And it's actually very similar to the first question. But around the counselor meetings, you had characterized it as people not necessarily choosing to meet with counselors. And I realize that Calgary, Toronto, very different sort of setups, but I know at least here, it's often a case of there aren't support staff there to have those meetings with. And so it is good to hear that it didn't make that much of a difference if you didn't meet with someone. But did it make a statistically relevant?
Yeah, sorry. So I'll clarify that. So I think to paraphrase the question, so I was asked earlier about the I guess predictive power of counting the number of sleeps and the number of shelter interactions, and I think you make the point that's pretty common that there's often not a lot of people that are able to. There's not enough counselors to go around quite often, right? And so it's maybe better to count shelter stays because that's the most reliable thing, because somebody could not be meeting with a counselor perhaps just because there wasn't somebody available to meet with. Yeah, so that's, I think that's definitely true. And this is really, I think that it speaks to another important part of dealing with data, and I think Alina talked a lot about that in her presentation, right? I mean, this data is not easy to work with, right? And you can have, it's kind of what's called sort of noise in the data. So if you have people, if there's a confounding factor that are preventing people from speaking with a counselor that's not necessarily just related to their own choice, like maybe they really want to, but there's not one available, then that would kind of muddy the waters in how well that data is able to use to estimate somebody's risk. And it's a subtle point. So I think best practice, would never be to take that rule that I presented and apply it in your context in your program. Best practice is always to run this kind of rule search algorithm on the data that you have in your organization and see if it's the same for your stuff, because it might not be. Maybe there's other things in your data that are different. So yeah, it's a good point.
Can I take that one too? Sorry, I love these ones. So with that question too, we don't know if they were getting served for mental health by an external organization to this sample. So that's the biggest flaw with this kind of model, is if you're only looking at one data set at a time, you're going to get the bias of only one part of that person's experience, and then you're generalizing, and then you're making these decisions without seeing the big picture. So hence your point about context, and it's only an aid, not a decision making tool. It's a decision support tool.
I have a question. Okay.
I mean, it presupposes that the data is actually being collected within the organization, and that may not, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is the whole thing. It is very tricky stuff, and so it has, all of the data we're talking about, whatever it is, has this illusion of authority. And it's merely helpful. It's not necessarily authoritative. I mean, what's ultimately authoritative is the individual's discretion and how they proceed forward as a professional, I think.
Okay, there is one question from the audience, and then we'll take your question from Patricia. Can data from existing software be migrated to Compass without manual inputting? I think this is for you, Elena.
Yes.
Okay, that was short and sweet. Okay.
Since you're both from Calgary, I'll pursue data.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
There's a pipeline of data that's being collected for homeless people. Have you guys, like individually, have you thought of asking outside of the box creative questions to other people who are directly affected by homeless people, like the surrounding First Nations in Treaty 7? The reason why I'm asking that is I believe questions are not being asked with culture. The reason why is so self-identity, language, all these different type of like our culture that are not being asked in data. So when I go on outreach, statistics of what race you are, age, gender, sex, and that's basically it. Like there's more, but there's more like spiritual data that I've been, and that's what's missing. And the majority of the people downtown are Indigenous.
Yeah.
So in but doing data, it's I don't know, I'm like a nerd too, I guess, but it's
Yeah.
I find it's helping a lot, and that's one thing I think that's missing.
Yeah.
And like frontline worker, all the way to the top, that like I don't think that questions, we don't even have stats on that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. So yeah, I mean, to paraphrase the question for the people online, it's like, are we, when dealing with a whole range of different kinds of people, but Indigenous people specifically, are we asking the right questions? And I mean, this is such an important question. And so the short answer is, no, but this is something that I'm really interested in. Like, are we recording the right data in the first place? This is someone's story, right? And so does the person in the data see themselves in, like, and are we writing down the important thing that that person really wants their people to know about them? Yeah, and there's such important context that I think that we're missing, because you're right, it's just like age and first name, last name, and maybe how tall you are and whatever, right? It's not it's not who a person is. So I mean, I would love to talk to you about this more. I mean, this is something that I think is absolutely needed. So I mean, yeah, thank you for raising that.
I want to echo this because, it's basically inattentional bias. I mean, researchers and policy people and all the rest will assume, well, there's the data, and therefore, we can correlate, we can come up with assumptions and solutions and so on and so forth. But your very point prevails. Because if we're not asking the right questions, then the rest of this immediately falls apart, right? So, this has been a big part of my whole career, is just quite convinced that a lot of the time we're not asking the right questions. And so it's always extremely important to have meetings like this where we're converging together and to listen with great care, because there's so much that we simply don't know that we need to know. And yeah, this is very, very, very important stuff.
I guess mine would be, we need to build data processes, data pipelines, like you're referencing, that can accommodate that level of personalization and still give us meaningful insights when we do comparison work. So my closest example that comes to mind, and I think Jamie's here from Penticton. Trev, she's waving. So there's some really cool stuff that we're doing with the lived experience voice, developing the questions with us, as opposed to us imposing our questions. So we know what the decision makers want. We get that. That's cool. What do the end users feel is important? And how do they want to experience their data collection journey too? Because like somebody was saying today in the Indigenous ICE Coordinated Access meeting, people leave pieces of themselves in these digital trails. So they should have a say in what that looks like and what do they want us to know about. So in that piece, it's this client journey mapping that we're doing that is creating the data set from the lived experience perspective. And then that gets layered with, well, what does the service provider need to know? What does the funder need to know? And we can still do that in a way that everybody gets what they need in a better way, rather than just the top imposing down. Does that help? Does that help answer? Yeah.
I might just go on as I'm listening,
Yeah.
which is really good. And that's one of the issues that I've had was as a frontline worker and figuring out how to help people that are homeless just by collecting data. So figuring out who they are and, like I said, the reciprocal rate wherever they occur, and that helped me quite a bit.
Sweet.
And help me in meetings.
That's awesome.
Please.
Just to build up your point too, thanks very much for the presentation. It was great. I want to talk to you afterwards about my organization, something that we can collaborate on. I work for the Aboriginal Coalition in Homelessness in Victoria, BC.
Cool.
Just talking about inbuilt biases, even in the DNA of the structure, you're using Latin-based and Greek terms, right? Descriptors. I'm assuming you're Romanian, so I understand that Latin stuff. But you also have the terminology of stakeholder. And with some of the elders that we've worked with, that term's actually quite offensive. I know it's indeliberate, and I'm not doing this to kind of pull it out of the hole. But stakeholder, etymologically, where that even comes from, is grinding on the stakes to take the land. So these are biases that also, like discussions that need to occur with Indigenous groups, and also compensating them too. I don't know if there's a plan for that as well. If you're just taking knowledge and you're going to use it, or if they're going to be part of that broader economic reconciliation. So yeah, there's lots of questions. It's great work. This is awesome. I want to talk to you more. Thanks very much.
Sweet. I want that type of collaboration where I learn more through the conversation. So I welcome that, and I look forward to catching up. Please come to our event later at 5 o'clock at the bar. I got your number. Thanks.
Please.
Another question, I guess, related to the previous one about are we asking the right questions, right? I'm curious to hear from, I'll call it panel now. Building off of what you said about, okay, what does the client need to know? What does the funder need to know? What does the government need to know? What does the individual need to know? Like, you can make a list of You know, you can reduce some of that maybe through some sort of factor analysis or the knowledge of work that you're doing, putting things together. But I'm curious about perspectives on when's the right time to ask and get that information and how, right? You can't collect it all at the input into the shelter, for example. And so what do you ask at what point in time along someone's trajectory, hopefully into and hopefully out of homelessness?
Oh my goodness, that is such an amazing question, Ian. Just making our brains hurt right now. The truth, for me, I don't know when that is. Like, I don't know what the perfect path is because we've never had this data before. So that would be I would just be making that up right now. What I can tell you is we will always need to have a dynamic data ingestion process. And I think the faster we the quicker we accept that and build that muscle, the faster we are going to be able to answer those questions and that you're bringing up. Government will, there's certain things that keep coming up over and over again. The beauty of working in different parts of the ecosystem is I'm having the same conversations in mental health, in immigration and settlement, in domestic violence, in housing and homelessness. So there's actually, it's not innumerable. It's not infinite, right? So it's not impossible to have a pretty solid inventory to kind of prioritize off of. But I also know that that inventory is much bigger than our current lens of what that inventory is. So, and it probably boggles our minds to be like, man, I can't even get my PIT count data right. I can't imagine blowing that up. So the tools we have, it's at our disposal right now in our mental, capacities to we're gonna need to get there. But I can't answer that in something I can stand behind right now because I've never had this data before to tell you.
It may be as much a question of how as in what. And that is to say we should always be open as professionals and organizationally and as a policy system to new inputs that hadn't occurred to that entity, whether it's the individual, the organization, or the system. And so there's this one final fancy word, hegemony, this power over that a system or a human being, an organization, whatever it is, would have in a situation just by presupposing that it knows. And the whole deal in all this is it's such a wicked problem, and it's involving so many different people, so many different systems, at so many different points in time, that we have to hold an almost contradictory viewpoint at all times, and that is that we know things, but we're also prepared to be tentative about that in the sense that we need to know additional things and further sharpen and focus those things we think we actually know. And that's the whole kings. So I would go after the question of how we look at things as much as what we look at it.
And I guess, regarding that question, I have no idea. I'm an engineer. And the reason why I said that is, don't let the algorithms fool you, right? Again, there's a lot of buzzwords around AI, machine learning. It kind of gives the impression that you can take terrible data and somehow have wonderful insights. John's exactly right. If there's bias in your data, there's bias in your output.
Yep.
100%, right? Like there's a saying in AI, garbage in, garbage out. So and it's not to say that data is garbage, but if you're not asking the right questions, or if there's bias in your data, machine learning is not going to magically fix it. These algorithms are not, it's not magic, right? It's, and, don't let a data scientist tell you what to do. Like, you're the experts in the room, right? You know the important questions, you know the important problems. Yeah, exactly. So, I just really echo what Alina and John have been saying. Like, your data's got to be good, and you're the experts on knowing what questions to ask, not like the data science people.
Question, and then you, okay, please.
So I'm going to try and articulate this as best I can. So given the complexity of this discussion and the various levels, and then even when you think about the Canada context, you've got federal, provincial, and then we represent 9 different communities, and then within each municipality there's different values, biases, and complexities. So are there governance structures or recommendations that you would bring forth as we think through navigating those complexities, and or models or examples in other communities or
So I'm not aware of any. The ethical AI is a thing, right? There are conferences on it. Kind of disappointing right now what they're talking about in it. I don't think it would be useful in what you've asked. But don't sell yourself short. There's nothing AI can do that you can't do, right? So if you want to make decisions, if you want to sort of see that you're asking the right questions, if you want to make sure you're treating people with respect in how they're recorded in your data, you can already do that. You can write those best practices, and then all a data scientist does is automate some aspects of your process, right? So, yeah, but so it's not a great answer, but it's, yeah.
There was a question over there. Okay, please.
I'm curious to hear more about how that connection to, somebody has a particular need, and then there's, perhaps a range of options that would appear. Something we're thinking about a lot in Toronto, which is huge, and we have many services, and really what we find is that what people really need to know is, who can I trust? Who's going to treat me with respect when I walk in the door? And, is this going to be comfortable for me when I go to this location? And that's something that is an intentional that, you just can't think about how to do it through this type of methodology, except maybe through some kind of like shared platform that workers and service users could access and with ratings, reviews, or
Exactly.
have
Yeah.
that conversation and update the data so it's always fresh.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something.
Yeah. So in the Navigi part of Compass, that's exactly what we were trying to do. The interesting part there, it's the challenges with these intangibles is that they rely on crowdsourcing insights, right? So the tool is only as good as people using it. So if there's no buy-in into, this being kind of a community-led approach, then it's just going to die on the vine, right? But what we have conceptualized with the end users, and by the way, in the Help Seeker app, it's an interesting phenomenon where we introduce comments and ratings for services, and there was a lot of backlash on us to have that in the platform, but not from the end users. The end users were the ones who asked us to put it in there. They wanted that voice to be heard anonymously. There were some communities where we had to turn off that feature to be able to operate in those communities. So I think we got some work to do to get to what you're saying, to create some comfort that these ratings are valuable, right? That it's not the be all end all, it's just another data point. And if you're consistently getting a bad review on something, like maybe we should take a look at that. Like, it's okay, right? It's okay. But what the other recommendation was badges. Like, this is a safe LGBTQ space, but the people have you been a client of this service? Yes. Okay, then it's that badge from end users means more than my opinion that I just know the executive director, right? So have you been a client is one of those key components. So yeah, there's been badges conceptualized. We haven't implemented them because it's on a laundry list of everything else to do. So there's ways to create this network effect, positive network effect. There's also the value of crowdsourcing recommendations. So the algorithm might recommend, hey, based on the needs you've identified, these would be the kind of top options for you would you like to filter the closest to you? Would you like to filter by badges? Would you like to filter by ratings, et cetera? But there's also the crowdsourcing aspect that might say, don't go to those guys for this, go to these guys for that, right? So there's also this aspect of cross-referencing the data with the perspective of lived experience as well, that you can incorporate in the product design. So it's a great question.
There is also a comment from the live chat. I just wanted to read it. Knowing the right questions to ask is one thing, but knowing how to ask and ensuring you're not embedding bias when asking them is equally important. Just,
Absolutely.
questions? Okay, please.
I'd like to follow with Madeline
Yeah, we use the well-being lens to think about it. So there's different aspects, and we had we tested it with different communities, because there's aspects of well-being that are not typically thought about in the kind of traditional mainstream sense. So we usually do the basic needs, like the housing, whatever, food, etc. We don't often talk about environment or connection to nature, for instance, or spirituality. So having a more holistic approach to it allows us to be more holistic in the design of the technology too. So the example that I think is closest to your question is work we're doing with the in North Battleford, with the Battlefords First Nations. So that's the BATC. It's the corporation and with the various member nations, and they're looking at it from a holistic perspective, of course, right? It's kind of part and parcel. So when they talk about health, they don't just mean medical, right? So we had to develop something that was still allowed us to collect data that we could then leverage to make a funding ask to, let's say, a housing body, but it still needed to be holistic to reflect the true nature of what was going on in the community. And like you're saying, majority of folks were not visibly homeless, so they would have been missed in a pit count, but you need to understand the entire picture, because then you can also see like where some of the assets and the supply demand, and from a holistic, like it's all about balance, right? The elders always tell us that. The knowledge has always been here. We just haven't been listening. So.
Okay.
Got a few minutes left.
Please.
I'll ask you a question.
Oh, no.
I was wondering, like, I think my biggest question is like, how do we migrate data into your system from the archaic systems that we're, say, using in Toronto, like Pirouette, and some of these, just like in my mind, affordable, sort of things, and then also like these HMISs, like, can you take that data from these types of programs and migrate it over? I know you kind of covered that, but I guess
Like you're asking how would one go about that?
no, I'm wondering if it can be done,
Yeah.
and if the data's gonna translate through.
Yeah.
Given that
Yeah.
you're working with, like, in Toronto, they have their own system, and then there's HMIS systems, like what we were working with in Calgary back 1,000 years ago. And
Still
all
there,
that
yeah.
stuff, right?
Yeah. It's the good news is it's really possible now. It wasn't. I don't want to say it wasn't possible 10 years ago when we did HMIS in Calgary, because it was even possible back then. It was just really hard, and it took lots of humans. There's businesses entirely developed to solve just that problem of data migration, and there's all these things like look up data mesh if you want to like blow your mind with tech. It's amazing what we can do now. So it's not as novel as we might think anymore. Which I'm feeling you nod beside me, which is good because he knows more than I do about this. I know it because I take these data sets and I have to migrate them to make sense of them for my various plans and reports. So I knew it was possible even in Excel. It just took a long time. We can now streamline that. There's also these things, and I just want to make sure, like Ian hears me with this on HIFAs. These products are so integratable, right? So you can continue, like if you love, like maybe somebody loves Pirouette, like maybe you just made somebody cry that loves Pirouette, Angela. You can keep using Pirouette, right? Yeah, you can.
No, but I think, here in Toronto, we've been talking about this, and, within the context of coordinated access, and there's 15 different or 100,000 different agencies using 15 to 20 different types of software, and then the city of Toronto itself has this shelter system, database that they're using, and it's moving toward coordinated access, but like, to me, it's not, there's nothing coordinated about it, right? So, in the sense that we can't migrate data from Pirouette, from funded agencies, we can't migrate data into that system from other places, and so I'm just, like, from my perspective, like, what I'm thinking in my head is like, how, we can't migrate that data here, so how can we migrate the data from Pirouette, from, I can't remember what the system that they're using, the shelter system database here, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But yeah,
It's possible. Don't let tech people tell you, don't let tech people ever make you feel stupid is my number one lesson doing a tech company. And we're the users. We need to demand better of our tech as well, because it's here to serve us, and we're not here to serve the tech. So sometimes we forget that.
yeah.
Thanks, Angela.
Okay, thank you. I think we're running out of time. I'd like to thank everyone, and please give it up for our presenters. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Just to remind you that session recordings will be available online, so everyone who is registered will get a notification how to access it when it's available. Thank you so much.